Hello, Gary Walker there in England. Gary, nice to talk to you. Thanks for taking time to talk with us.
Oh, this is a pleasure. Thank you very much, Nick.
Just by the fact that you're in England, that means you never left. You never went back home to Glendale.
No, we liked it here quite a bit, and it seemed to work out very good for the group. And Glendale, I was with another group at the time, just quickly, was called the Standells, and they became quite big over there. But I decided I think it was better that I brought the boys over to England, Scott and John, and did the Walker Brothers thing, as I originally came over with P.J. Provey, and I think we liked Europe and everything else. The last time I think we went to Glendale or anything like that was just to see my parents when we had a bit of a break from all the touring and stuff.
Was the Glendale Galleria there yet, the big shopping mall?
No, it wasn't. The last time I went there, I went to see a couple of my very close friends that I grew up with. Right next to one of the person's house, Dean's house, was they built this new shopping center. So, because Glendale was quite famous for this very old-fashioned type of street that you would see in old 40s and stuff in the movies. I remember Spielberg always loved filming there because it had that kind of feel to it that he couldn't get anywhere else. So it was quite famous. Became famous for John Wayne because he moved there with his father, and they had a chemist or a drugstore, they call him, and he went to Glendale High School, and of course the other famous person was me. In that.
We're going to be talking about your late colleague who sadly died in May, and that was John Walker. How do I pronounce his real name? Mouse, was it?
Right. I'm glad you brought it up, Nick, because when we first started out, I was down at one side of the street, and the Walker brothers were up the other side. And John's real name is John, I almost can't say it, Moss. He had so much trouble with people pronouncing his name, he changed his name to Walker, because they were calling him John Moose, John Mouse, and eventually somebody called him John Sauce. And he said, okay, that's it, because we used to call each other by our last name, and he would say Ingle or Leeds or whatever, and he changed his name to Walker. And him and his sister were working in the clubs there. And then we got with an agent, and the agent suggested Brothers on the end, because there were quite a few acts that were quite successful, the Isley Brothers, Righteous Brothers, Everly Brothers, and he felt from an agent's point of view he could get more work because of the Brothers thing. Everybody kind of associated with it. That's how it came, and that's eventually how it stuck with the group and carried on from there, really.
Did the agent suggest Walker as well, or was that John's idea?
No, it was John and Judy Walker was the first original name, because his sister and him played together. Scott joined the group as a bass player. Judy, the sister, well, she had to quit. I think she got married, or I can't remember what happened, really. But then it was the three of them. Another drummer called Tiny. Then the agent suggested that they call themselves the Walker Brothers, and it kind of stuck from there.
Do you remember your first meeting with John?
I remember going to the club Gazzari's, was at one of the Hollywood clubs, a very big club, where they were playing, because we all used to kind of go around and watch each other, because we were like the local musicians. It'd probably be like all the guys in Melbourne or whatever that play certain clubs and stuff. Everybody knows each other, and I went to see them play, and that was the first time I met John. He came off stage because he knew who I was with, the Standells. We got along okay, and he was very polite. Scott came immediately off the stage, went out the back door and disappeared, and I never saw him until I went back a couple other times. At that time, I wasn't thinking about them coming to England or anything. I was just seeing them like I would go see Leon Russell, who was playing, or the Loving Spoonful, or the Byrds, or somebody playing around. We would all do that, and a lot of the times they would ask you to come up on stage and play. So we all did that also. And then I think the third time I went there, and I said hello to John or something, I followed Scott out to the back, because he would leave the club and go out to the back of the club. And I just started talking to him. A very, very shy person. Just 3 doors down, Jack Jones, the more ballad-type singer, was singing. We went and watched him, because Scott wanted to hear what he was doing in that, because of the nature of Scott's voice and all that. But the original voice, of course, when doing the Walker stuff, mainly was John. He would sing the lead. And it eventually switched over to Scott because of the nature of the tune, and they thought he could do it a bit better. And that's kind of how that really happened.
And Gary, were they performing as, before you were in the band, were they known as the Walker Brothers already?
Yes, four of us in the band. They were the Walker Brothers. I was in the Standells. P.J. Proby would come in and just for fun sing to get some drinks, really, because everybody would buy him a drink. We used to have just a lot of fun. Then we'd rotate the clubs. We'd go to another club, Whiskey A Go-Go, and then the Walkers would go to the Peppermint West. These were just clubs. We were right at the right place at the right time, and that was when this dance craze came in called the Twist. And clubs were opening left and right, and people were going to them, and they absolutely loved this dance craze and the music. And of course, then the big thing happened. These four people came along from England and changed the whole world. They were responsible, really, for all the movement, the Beatles, I think, everywhere. If it wouldn't have been for them, it probably would have been for us.
I suppose they would have been for a lot of other similar musical acts. They changed the landscape, didn't they?
Yeah. See, nobody ever wrote their own stuff. You usually had all kinds of writers. You would either cover something that somebody did you thought could be a hit again, or somebody, if you were in with the record companies and that, they'd find somebody to write you, hopefully, a hit tune. And now, of course, because of the Walker Brothers' vocal range and what they could do, we were incredibly lucky to have Burt Bacharach and all these heavyweight writers come in to do their songs. And just didn't matter who did those songs, they were going to be hits anyway. It just happened that all the stuff fit together. You had a look, a different accent, they had long hair, they had nice voices. And it was different than the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. So I think there was a big slot there that we were just there again at the right time.
And how did the poor Standells take your leaving them?
They weren't happy. They weren't happy because we were very, very polished and very tight, and everybody knew what everybody was going to do and so forth. And they were just getting their recording contract. And, I said, I'm going, because I never would have had a chance ever to go to Europe, or even when we came down to Australia, which we'll talk about a bit later. I said, I have to do it. And Scott wanted to come to Europe. He didn't mind if he had to swim. John said, yeah, I'll come along too, because they didn't think like I did anything was going to happen. And I said, I've got it all planned. The plan went very good, but it did, and a lot of people don't believe it. I went to the record company for 6 to 8 months telling them about the Walker Brothers while we were here in England. They said, oh yeah, and that was it. And they'd have a cup of tea and everything. And about 6.5 months later, they realized they might have something here that could be a winner. It proved out right. The only problem was we wasted 6 months doing it. But, it's always, whenever you try anything that kind of is a little different, a little original, it's the only thing that will work, I think, because the rest were just copying everybody. And getting through that door is really hard because they don't want to take a chance, you know what I mean? No, let's keep sticking with the Beatles, let's keep sticking with the Rolling Stones. That formula's working, let's not change it. But if you take a chance, then all of a sudden, Johnny Depp comes through and a lot of other people. Johnny Depp was always hanging around the clubs in Hollywood and that when he was a nobody, and he had radical ideas and everything. And of course, he's one of the best stars in the world.
Gary, it was a radical thing because bands came over from England to America, but besides, the only band that I know of is in the 60s was the Misunderstood, that were Americans that went to England, and the Walker Brothers.
That was it, yeah. All it was a reverse thing, because when the Beatles came over, of course, nobody's ever seen long hair, so we grew our hair immediately, and then we had an accent, which was California, and the Beatles had the Liverpool accent, and then we had a different vocal thing, and then we were all thin. If we turned sideways, we'd disappear, and we just thought we'd take this chance, and it did. All the Americans that came to England had the crew cuts, and they were Bobby Darin, or Sinatra would go there, and not many groups. You just wouldn't. There were too many good groups, I think, in England. It just happened to be that we were halfway decent, and they stepped on it, and it worked from there. It was a reverse thing.
How did John, yourself, and Scott cope with all that? It was pretty quick that you became big pop stars overnight.
In Hollywood, they only, like in California, the only ones that got that type of admiration was the Beatles and the Stones and that, people sitting out everywhere. When we got it, we just stayed outside London, and I had a flat there and would practice with our gear and everything. Then as it started to move up, Scott and I would always walk up and down the high street and go shopping and get the food. One day, we were just starting to do a little bit of television here and there, and the faces were starting to get known. There was a lady, flower lady, and she was about 60, and she said, aren't you two the Walker Brothers? And Scott and I passed out, because it'd be fine if it was some girl, maybe 15 or 16, but in England they had this exposure that got to everybody. As it built, we went with it because we just got used to wherever we went, there were going to be girls screaming and yelling and everything. I took my father came over, and I took him to the famous landmark, the Tower of London. And I was in there with him in the Tower of London, walking around outside the building, and a couple girls saw me, and eventually they had to shut the tower and told me never to come in there again unless I was going to tell them. Because all the girls came around us, and there was chaos and everything. But you got used to it, and that was it. Where you went to the hotels, the girls would be there. The airport, they'd be there. When they're not there, I think that's when you start worrying.
Yeah, exactly. Did fame change you three, or do you think that you're pretty grounded?
No, fame didn't change us at all. It gave us more power to do kind of stuff that we would have liked to do, and they would listen to us a bit more that way. The only thing that changed was the people around us. I know this sounds very strange. When I first met John Lennon, I was absolutely paralyzed by who he was because I was a real big fan. And, of course, Lennon was absolutely fine. There wasn't a problem, nothing. It was me was the weird one, and that would happen to us. People that used to know us and everything else now thought we had changed. We haven't. They changed because they were a little taken back by this massive image of playing for the Queen, being here, going there, girls screaming everywhere. It was quite intimidating. So we were eventually isolated, and the only thing we had was the three of us kind of together, or our girlfriends with us when we had one. That was it. We kept, thank heavens, we really kept our feet on the ground, where a lot, well, they got heavy into a drink or they got into drugs, and then they started believing that that was for real. And, of course, when they found out it wasn't, and it wasn't going their way, they were in big trouble. Some even think killed himself and everything. So there's a terrible dark side to it all.
Where did you meet the venerable Mr. John Lennon?
As we got bigger, we became on the same kind of level. But I think we became more popular than them because you would see them all the time at these clubs we would go to, the Scots of St. James and these London clubs in that period in the 60s. Then we'd all talk about music and everything. And, well, we became friends because I think we were the only ones that we could become friends with that you weren't scared to death of or anything anymore.
And speaking of girls, I noticed that John was married 4 times, so he was a bit of a ladies' man.
I know. You'd think he'd get it right once. I think the last one, Cynthia, is a marvelous girl and very helpful for John, and at the later stage in that, she stuck with him. And John, when he did a few playing over here, he wanted her to be on stage in that. She would do that and really take care of him in that. The first time he was married, nobody was supposed to know because the companies, the record companies, were scared to death if the girls found out they wouldn't have a chance to marry her, or some philosophy like that. And he married, well, quite a famous person. First wife was Kathy Young, and she had the #1 record in America. She is still touring now. He did see her about 3 or 4 years ago, and that was the last I've heard of it. But eventually they found out he was married, and then I do believe, you wouldn't think it, but I do believe that the popularity of the Walker Brothers, then being away from your wife so long, eventually, just like movie actors and actresses and stuff, they can't seem to hold that part together unless you really are really organized. Because you're away all the time, and then it's real hard trusting somebody with about 100 girls trying to beat your door down.
The life of a pop star, isn't it, Gary?
That is the unfortunate, horrible part of it all.
Oh, yes. But, I pity you poor pop stars.
Yes, that was it. Same thing. We couldn't go anywhere, and that included Australia.
So tell us a little bit about the Australian tour, Gary.
I'll tell you, you want to know when we came there? We came there with Roy Orbison, the Yardbirds, and us and somebody else, I can't remember who it was. I think the first thing we did, we played a boxing ring in Sydney somewhere. I think that was the biggest venue they could get. We stayed with the promoter, and what he did was, they stopped building the Opera House when we were there. That shows you how long ago it was. But he had this boat that held about 40 people, go 80 miles an hour. I never got over that. But he lived up from the Opera House, up one of the inlets or the rivers, in this massive big house. And I remember that. And I remember he moved his diving board. This is for all the Australia fans. He moved his diving board from the pool to the other end of the pool for some reason. Scott and John were chasing me around the pool. They were going to throw me in, and I said, I'm not going for it. So I saw where the old diving board was, so I jumped in. And, of course, it was only 3 feet there. And I smashed all my feet and ankles and everything. I could barely do the tour after that. So that was one thing. And then we went and did New Zealand.
Gary, did you have time off to see a bit of the country besides diving into shallow pools?
No, they flew us everywhere, so we didn't get to do that. I always wanted to, I'm coming back and I'm going to do it. They kept trying to say, well, can you, John and Scott, get back together and do a tour? Scott didn't want to do it because he just wants to do what he wants to do. Then they started raising the money, and it started getting really horrible. I mean, a real lot of money, but still no good. Well, that's it. I will just leave this music for a while. I'll do a few recordings of groups and stuff. John started doing his recordings in Hollywood and started making some more demos and stuff, and Scott just carried on doing his type of thing.
Gary, by about 1968, you guys had enough. You split up. How was the breakup? How was it on yourself and John?
I'll tell you exactly what happened, Nick. We had two managers at the time. And, of course, as you start getting a little more famous and a lot of money starts flying around, things start changing. One manager was pulling John one way, and the other manager was pulling Scott the other way, and I was kind of caught in the middle. They were popular enough that you could go out on your own. But, of course, then you lost the magic and everything else. And then, I mean, we saw each other for quite a bit of time. All they had to do, I did a session with Paul McCartney, Jimi Hendrix, Graham Nash, myself, and a few other people for Mike, his brother. And we did it all for free. The next day the phones were ringing and Jimi Hendrix's manager was on there, or mine was. What are the boys going to get? What's Gary going to get for playing on this session? We said we did it for free, and they went no. So they stopped the whole thing. You were doing from your heart. And I think Paul's the only one that's got a copy of this now, Paul McCartney.
That was Paul McCartney's brother, Mike McGeer.
That's him. We weren't impressed by it. We just thought it was a lot of fun that we would do it. Like, I'd do something for you, Nick. You know, you wouldn't have to pay me for it. I'd do it because I wanted to do it, and it'd be good, and you could get somebody from Crowded House in there, whatever.
And I'd just like to mention, Gary, you're not being paid for this interview either.
Oh, that's all right. No, we never get paid anyway. Now I found out. That's typical for being in the group. If you're a manager, you make millions.
Yeah.
But if you're in the group, you get a $5 maybe. But anyways, we found out, same with the Beatles, same with the, not necessarily the Stones, but even it wasn't as obvious. If Record Company would have let Paul do what he wanted, what John wanted to do, because when you were in the Beatles, you couldn't do that. You had to do a Walker Brothers thing or a Beatle thing, you see. Scott wanted to do some of his own type of singing. John wanted to do some, and they said, Phillips, the company said, no, you're not. You're doing Walker Brothers stuff, and that's it. Only other way you're going to get to do that, the group's going to break up. John Lennon will leave, Paul will leave, Scott will leave, John will leave. And now I think they have realized that, yeah, go ahead, let them, because they're all creative, and that's, I think, the most important part of it. Of course, that does lead to, well, the only way I'm going to get to do what I want is break up. That's happened, you know, no one thinks in that league that stayed together, of course, are the Rolling Stones. They just kind of still, I guess, do what they want.
They outsmarted the record companies.
I'm quite shocked that they took all those medals and that, because that wasn't their thing, was it?
No.
I think their thing now is Italian suits and big cars and houses. I guess that's it. But Bill Wyman told me when he was in the Stones, because John Walker stayed with Bill Wyman for about 8 months in the south of France.
He produced one of John's singles too, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right. And they became quite good friends. And Bill Wyman was very upset because he had to leave England because of the tax structure and everything else. That's another bad thing. You make some money, and of course then you have to leave your own country to keep the money or something, as opposed to giving it to the government. And he was telling John when he saw him a bit later that he said he's made more money in his restaurants, they're called Sticky Fingers or something, and he has quite a few of them, than he ever did in the Rolling Stones. And John says, yeah, maybe we ought to open a hamburger place. And I said, yeah, I'm with you. We never did it, but anyway.
Walker Burgers.
Yeah, Walker Burgers, that's it. I like it. Yeah, I did. See, I would have thought of that in the old day, because Scott and I would change the names of everything. I did a record called The Death of Romance, and we wouldn't call it that. We'd call it The Death of Ramirez or something. And there were some girls on our tour, and they were called the Paper Dolls. And immediately, of course, we changed their names to Paper Bags, which is our kind of warped sense of humor. I like the Walker Burger. That could be.
There you go. Gary, speaking of Death of Romance, you guys did get together again in the mid-70s and did another 3 albums. I mean, the fact that you did 3 together meant a bit of the old magic or camaraderie or whatever was still there.
Yeah, it was very good, very fun. It didn't seem to work as well as the first time around, I guess, telling it kind of hardcore. But the only thing that happened to us was there that we were sitting in the lounge and looking at each other. I said, why don't we write an album? We said, because we've never written anything. Let's see what happens problems with it and how we do it and that. So they all agreed. We all went in separate rooms, and I wrote a couple tunes. I wasn't the one doing all that stuff, but I was just getting into it. Then of course, we broke up again. But Scott wrote a few and the others, and the album was going to be called Death of Romance, which I wrote because the Walkers were very romantic, and the album The Night Flights was totally opposite. No one ever heard it anything like this, but it was changed to Night Flights, and we took it into the record company, and they sent it around, and nobody knew what to do with it because it wasn't rhythm and blues, it wasn't this, it wasn't romantic, it wasn't pop, it wasn't, and no one knew what to do with it. So I think it sold eventually maybe 2,000 copies, probably the worst album selling. But what it did was it gave us some credibility I don't think you could buy. It's one of David Bowie's favorite albums. He covered Night Flights, one of the tunes. I talked to Bono, U2, and he said if it wasn't for that album, the Night Flight album, he never would have written the Joshua Tree album. So I was starting to hear stuff that, well, you couldn't buy it with money, and I said, and we were very, very impressed. It was done in 1978.
Yeah.
I think you could release it now. Might even sound a little old now, but it would really still get some credibility.
It only sold 2,000 copies maybe, but it sold to the right 2,000 people, obviously.
That's it, 2,000 who knew what was happening, you see. And, of course, the fans, they were beating down the door not to give us a hug and a kiss now. They smashed chairs and hit us with clubs. Because all the tunes we used to do, the mothers even hated us. They said, you can't listen to those Walker Brothers. All they do is make you cry, because we made all the girls cry, so the mothers didn't like us. But now we came out with this nightmarish thing, Dr. Frankenstein or whatever, and of course the girls didn't like it whatsoever. There was nothing to cry about there. I don't think we lost them. But no, that's when we get into John, I found out, because I've been doing a lot of Japan, Germany, you down there now, that the fans don't like it. They didn't like John passing away and dying because they don't want to let him go because of what he gave them. You understand what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you see, it's the same. It's the same with John Lennon. We don't want to let him go because he gave us something special and all that. And now that he's gone, or John's gone, or one of the Doors, or whoever it might be, I don't know why it's a different type of tragedy. It's not like your mother or your father. It's just, I suppose, when Sinatra passed away, you see, he's still here, and same with John, because they left that. But, of course, if you're a fan and they've done that, moved you that much, they just don't want to see it end and everything. Because it is part of their childhood, growing up, and their life, courting, whatever it might be. And it just will happen. And, of course, there's nothing we can do about it.
Like you said there, Gary, it's just a little piece of you that's gone. You listen to the music back then or whatever, you feel connected is the word, I think.
Yeah. It is totally that. I mean, I listen to this stuff now, and I'm quite surprised. The big workload and some of the things involved in lyrics and everything, and I'm very impressed with it. And I remember I used to hear it. We used to be in that studio. It seemed like forever, and we couldn't wait to get out, because as soon as we got out, we could go to the club and meet the girls, couldn't we? And stuff like that, and have a few drinks, and then you can relax. Of course, we were kind of guaranteed we'd meet a girl because we were famous, you see. But it was very bizarre, Nick. And now I know kind of how girls feel when about 10 guys are after you.
Overwhelmed.
It changes around, you see. Now you've got 10 girls after you. Now this is a different story. Yeah. It makes you react funny and everything else. I don't know, because I never ran across it ever before, because I'd be one of the 10 guys trying to meet the one girl. Yeah. And, of course, she'd always go with someone else and never me. I think we all go through that, and we might meet eventually. But I loved it. The best thing, when anybody asked me anything about it, I said, what's the best thing for you? And I said, the best thing for us was how much fun we had. I mean, we absolutely had we got to travel and see everything, and we just permanently had fun, regardless of the money, because we only were on salaries, and the money went into the office. That's how they used to do it. They'd give you a little car to run around with. You'd have your flat or your apartment or a house, and then they'd give you maybe £50 a week to spend, which was a lot, because I think everybody was making £8 in those days. Then you were totally happy, because we were happy anyway. That was it. We were a little unhappy when we found out all the money went missing, but that's showbiz, isn't it, Nick?
A lot of groups in the 60s suffered the same fate, didn't they, Gary?
Yeah, it happens. All of them. I talked to George Harrison. When I mention these names, I'm not dropping names. I just happen to know these people like, well, you would know the different disc jockeys down there, or whoever, or some of the groups in there, them. I was talking to George Harrison because we usually would see either in one of the clubs they were suing EMI for, well, it must have been, I think they got paid 10 years ago for millions. And I said, well, that's all right for you, George. I said, because you've got 2 or 3 million in the bank, you know, so you can sit out by the pool and cry with the 2 million. I said, the rest of us, if they cut you off and the office has got the money, I said, you're in big trouble. Eventually, they did win their money back and everything else.
It took a long time, though.
Oh, God, yeah. Years it took. That's the way it goes here. EMI said, we'll give the Beatles 50% of everything. And they said, okay, and they signed it. And then they asked EMI for the 50% of everything. And EMI says, well, where'd you get that information? You said it was in the contract. He said, no, that's not what it says. And that was it. That was all that happened. And then the lawsuit started. Of course, at their level, God, Lord knows, well, it would take 15 to 20 years, whatever. And every time I saw George, I said, you still suing EMI? And he said, yeah, we still are. I think they got it all, well, eventually they did get it all worked out and everything. That's the problem with big money, a lot of problems.
Big money, big headaches. Gary, did you keep in regular touch with John after the Night Flights album and after you guys broke up?
No, we didn't. I think we all went back to being, I guess, kind of normal. I think he worked back over there. I don't know what he did for a while. I didn't know that he was seriously ill one time. I didn't have much contact with Scott because he was on his own doing his own thing. And when I did see John the last couple times he came over here, he told me that he was very, very sick and he almost died from drinking, about however long it was now. But they saved him, and then he stopped drinking entirely. He didn't have a drink for 19 years, I don't think. I think as we were young and foolish, like all of us are, we probably just overdid it. It did a little bit of damage, well, quite a bit of damage on John, because he ended up with liver cancer, even though he went straight towards the end. P.J. Proby. They found him on the floor, and he weighed about 8 stone, and he was almost dead. They brought him back. He doesn't drink anymore. Those people can quit, and you've got a drink problem. These are serious drinkers. All of us have got a chance now to quit, because if we want to quit, you know what I mean? I think there's such a stress on the younger crowd now that everybody's been driven to drink, and at least you can escape a bit. It's a horrible way to do it, but everything is so we need another Beatles or Walker Brothers, something to push us back up again, don't we?
If you do say so, yes. Well, maybe we need another return to the past. Yeah, we need something like that. It's just so, I think it's good. I mean, that's why I think a lot of the movies now, anything that can stop you thinking about, oh my God, I got to pay that mortgage. I hope I got enough to buy the food this week. You know what I mean? And then you're trying to put some of your children through school, and you've got to take care of them a bit too, because there's no jobs for anybody and no work. It's probably the same down there. When they asked me, they said, what'd you ever leave California for? I said, gosh, I don't know why, because I liked it here. But you've got weather, you got it, just like you. You've got the weather, everything. And you can go out and cry by the pool and think about it. You know, well, here, you have to go cry in the snow. It's a different thing. I think we're quite lucky with our climate, of course, our country that we have and that. I was even going to move down there. I liked it so much. You would have been a 5-pound pom via America.
Yes, that's me. I'm ready. We used to get in the country because they were asking for people to come down. I think it would benefit, and of course, expand the country and everything. Now, you can't just get in there. You got to, it's a little different now, because one of the probably...
Gary, we're doing too well.
I love it. Yeah. And you still got some space there. Went to New Zealand, of course. In New Zealand, I got caught. Maybe you did too. I don't know if you've been there, Nick.
No, I haven't, no, Gary.
But if you have any English pounds, they'll give you 5 New Zealand dollars for 1 English pound or something. So I got rid of about 20 English pounds. And, of course, the New Zealand dollar was worth 20p or something, 20 pence. But they got me with it. But I love that. It's the only place where we had to change our show, Nick. This will be interesting. I came back in the dressing room, and I told Scott, I said, we're going to have to switch the show around and not do Walker Brothers. He said, why? I said, because the Yardbirds, which are a heavyweight group, I think Jimmy Page was playing the guitar at the time, were getting booed off the stage. They didn't like him. And they didn't even like Roy Orbison. I couldn't believe it. How can anybody not like him? We went out, and all we did was the Frank Sinatra show. We did Stormy Weather, My Funny Valentine, and they absolutely loved us, because evidently New Zealand was back still in 1948 or something. But I just loved everything about the town. And anyway, they absolutely loved us for doing all these old-fashioned tunes. So not many people know that.
No.
No, so I hope they're listening in New Zealand.
Look, Gary, we better wind it up now. It's been a pleasure. I just want to mention that you and John co-authored a book, No Regrets, Our Story.
Let me tell you about the book quick. They talked us into it. Of course, they wanted all three to do it. Scott wouldn't do it, as usual. And we put some pictures in there of the families and that. But all it is, we're not those type of writers. All we've done is kind of like David Niven or anybody would write this type of book. We just put some stories like we've been talking here, Nick. You know what I mean? And they're kind of funny along that line, and they're quite enjoyable. And I think more so now because they'll give a little more picture of John. I must thank everybody that sent emails and everything from Australia about John and everything. I just wish we could have I wish the three of us would have got back together. They said, if you had any regrets, what was it? And I said, the three of us not playing anymore because we would have so much fun. It wouldn't be about the money, and it would have been really good. We could have come down there, gone to Japan, gone all around, and I think it would have been great. And thanking everybody for just staying with us and backing us through everything, Nick.
You got a lot of fans here in Australia, Gary, and such is life, as they say. It's been a pleasure, Gary.
All right, that's great, Nick. Okay, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Okay.